This is the Trading Psychology Podcast. This is VP, creator of No Nonsense Forex and author of the book No Nonsense Forex Trading Psychology. And with me always, it is Robb Reinhold.
Well, hello, everybody. This is Robb from Maverick Currencies and Maverick Trading. I've been a professional trader now for 25 years. It's definitely been an awesome journey. We'll definitely talk about that in this episode.
Thank you for sticking through the previous episodes where we talked about prop firm trading. I know that's not everybody's path, but there were a lot of takeaways in all of those videos, regardless of what your end game is. But that is over, and we are moving on to a really interesting topic, I think. I've been waiting to do this one. This is probably going to hit home for most of us, I would say, if not almost all of us. And that is going to be when your own family disapproves of the route you're taking as a professional trader. Robb, give some of your thoughts on this early on, and then we'll kind of drill down into particular instances, because is this something that you experienced along the way as well? It certainly was with me.
Absolutely. And when I decided one day, so let me give you a little bit of history. I had just got done with college, junior college. I know I don't like to brag too much, but just got done with a junior college. I knew I wanted to be self-employed. I always wanted to do something. And I had a teacher in sixth grade teach us about stocks. And I'd always been interested in that. And I started doing more and more reading about stocks. At the time, I was also, I just got my real estate license. I was doing some flipping of houses. The more I started to get into trading and stocks, I went home one day and told my wife, who was about 7 months pregnant at the time, that I was going to be a professional stock trader, and that's what I was going to do in my life. Now, look, you can imagine, 7 months pregnant, first kid, me bringing this idea of instability into our life. She has always been awesome. She supported me 100%. And she's like, whatever you want to do, I support you. And she knew that I was the kind of person where if I failed at this, I would have gotten 3 jobs. I would simply have made it to where we never went without. Maybe we wouldn't have had a whole bunch extra, but she knew that I was the kind of person that if I didn't succeed at this, that I would simply just work and make sure that we were taken care of. My father, on the other hand, wasn't so sure about it. Now, he's always been awesome and he's always been supportive, but he's always been like, hey, Robb, you better go finish that college degree so when this stock thing doesn't work out, you have something to fall back on. And I want to say it was about 10 years of getting that message after I had started this, that he finally started to realize, oh, maybe he doesn't need that college degree to fall back on. So yes, it took about 10 years for him to stop asking me about college. But I think we've all experienced some sort of this skepticism, disapproval from the people around us.
100%. Over here too, and I'd probably be lying if I said it didn't still continue a little bit even after the fact. But you said something very interesting there, or your father did. He didn't say if you fail, he said when you fail. Was that his actual words?
Absolutely. He was willing to watch me go down this path and see where it went. And, ultimately, in his mind, he's old school. You get a job for a company and you work for that company, and that's what you do. And that's how life is. But I was young. He was going to let me go and make my own mistakes and learn from them.
But you did say something interesting there too. You said something interesting to me off camera about spouses. You told me that at Maverick Trading, spousal disapproval is the number one reason that people make it all the way to the interest portion of Maverick Trading, but never actually pull the trigger. I found that very interesting.
Well, this is what we're going to talk about in this episode, is just how different people are and how complex family relationships are. They're very complex. So when someone in a family says, hey, this is what I really want to do, their decision is going to affect everyone else. And that's very difficult because people have different goals, people have different risk tolerances. I mean, imagine someone who is a risk taker marries someone who's very risk adverse. They are going to battle over just basic things like what investments they use and get over their whole life. I mean, that's just such a basic thing that they're going to disagree upon, much less getting into the world of active trading.
Yeah, and it makes total sense too for spouses because, especially if you're a man, because men generally are more bigger risk takers than women are. Certainly, that's always been the case. That's just our genetics. That's our evolution. But something I wanted to bring up too is, and I want people to think about this too because I didn't even hear about this for a long time. But as soon as I did, it made perfect sense. As far as the way people grow up, do they grow up risk averse or more risk savvy? I was told, God, maybe like not even a year ago, and it just all clicked, that whoever called the shots in your household, let's say you come from a two-parent home, if your father was the one who generally called the shots, those kids were a lot more accepting to risk. They were a little more aggressive. They didn't care if they hurt themselves or anything like that. To where if your mother called the shots, and this was the case in my family, I had a military father, but he wasn't your typical military father. He took a very passive role as far as all this went because he worked a lot. My mother called the shots, and I, as a result, was a very cautious child growing up. Some people know this on the show, some people don't. I'm also adopted. So I think genetics probably just took over after a while. It's that whole nature nurture thing, and I became a huge risk taker. But growing up, that was not the case. What do you think about that, Rob? Do you feel like that's generally the case? If you look back at maybe yourself and your friends growing up and their families, that's a pretty accurate statement, or do you think there's some flaws with that?
If you remember back to our first couple of episodes we did, I launched into this diatribe about nature versus nurture and all the studies we've done to figure out, okay, how much of who we are today is DNA coded, hard coded in DNA to where you really can't change it. And then how much is from your environment that you grew up in. And there's all these bunch of different studies, but most studies come in somewhere between 60 to 80% that DNA trumps your environment. However, there is definitely a component of your environment in it. So someone who is born genetically more of a risk taker, brought up in a risk-taking environment, is most likely going to be a risk taker. When it gets a little bit complex, when someone who is born, genetically not a risk taker, yet was born in a household that was a risk-taking household, then all of a sudden you say, well, that doesn't make sense. They grew up in a certain way, and now they're a different way. It just goes to show how strong genetics truly are when you take a look at personalities and stuff like taking risks.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, though, I think your parents especially. So let's just go to this because everybody has parents of some sort. Not everybody has a spouse. What they ultimately want for their children, and again, I don't have children, you do, so you can speak to this a lot more, is not so much your overall happiness. They would almost rather just have your safety above everything else, because that's what I had to go through. My happiness lied way over here off to the side somewhere, but my safety was all they really cared about. And I kind of resented them for that when I was younger. I didn't really understand until later that they actually felt happiness lied within safety. And so that was, ultimately paramount to them. They just couldn't understand that my version of happiness resided way outside of having a safety net or anything like that. Can you speak to that at all, Rob? Did you experience this at all? As a parent, what's your take on that overall?
You said a phrase, your definition of happiness or your version of happiness. That is the key. And that's why we have this friction within families, because everyone has a different definition of what happiness is. Some people, it's stability. Some people hate stability. Some people, they don't like it. They kind of like chaos and disorder, and they love to, swing for the fences, even though they're going to strike out a bunch of times. Some people never want to strike out. And so this is why it's so complex, is because you have different people in these relationships, and they all have different versions of what happiness is. So when they see you going out and doing something that would probably make them unhappy, they automatically are going to say, hey, that's not right. That's not the right way to do it based on my definition of happiness. And that's what you saw. You saw that in your life growing up. I saw that in my life growing up. This is where, again, you have to understand people. You have to understand different personality types. And this is really going to be, we're going to talk about this later in this episode, about kind of winning people over. Because if you understand what those people care about, then all of a sudden you can start to work towards those goals. But if you're working opposite of the things that make them happy, there's going to be some friction. There's no question about it.
Well, tell me this then. Here's an interesting question, because you are a parent, but you're also, people who have gotten to know you throughout this podcast know that you are an absolute risk taker. You're very active. And what they might not know is you've actually done some MMA in the past. So my question would be, if your son came to you and said, Dad, I want more than anything to become a professional MMA fighter, what would be your reaction there as far as his happiness compared to his safety? Let's say he's maybe 17 or 18 years old and he comes to you with this. What would your actual approach be? Because you would, the 18-year-old version of yourself would probably be totally supportive of this. But now that you're older, now that you're a parent, does that change any? It's because you're not what I would consider to be that typical risk-averse parent. So I'd like to get your take on that.
Well, this is actually going to lead to a very funny story, because before my wife and I got married, we talked about kids. We wanted to have kids. And I said, look, here's the deal. You can do all the first names. I don't care about that. But if we have a boy, his middle name has to be Danger. Just so he could say, Danger's my middle name. My wife's like, okay, that makes sense. So my son's middle name literally is Danger. If you look at his ID, it says Danger.
Get out of here.
Seriously. But here's the funny thing. He's quite cautious. He's a quite cautious kid, which just goes to show, as much as I try to raise risk takers, people that were going to just swing for the fences, that's not who he is. So now that I'm a little bit older in life and understand, I don't think that would be a pathway to happiness for him. Now, look, if he came to me and said, hey, I want to do it, I would absolutely support him. But as you know your kids so well, I would already know that he's probably not going to stick with this because it doesn't really fit his personality. So I still think, again, that genetic component is such a big deal. But I would absolutely support my kids in everything they did, even though I thought they were going to fail, just like my father did with me. Supported me, but thought I was going to fail. I had to win him over after 10 years.
And I think that's a really great segue into this next section here, because when you feel like they don't support you, sometimes that's not always what it really is. Deep down, they do support you. But, and I'm going to completely butcher this quote, but it was from Gary Vaynerchuk. And, he's really big in entrepreneurship and coaching others who want to go that route. And a very common thing that they would be up against is exactly what we're talking about right now. Their family just doesn't support their overall endeavors. Not so much they don't support you. When I heard this hit home so hard, and I still think about it all the time today, especially when I call my parents on the weekends. He said, it's not that they don't support you. He goes, and this is going to be a really tough pill to swallow. They just don't believe in you. And I'm like, man, is that accurate or is that accurate? But honestly, though, Rob, and I think other people can attest to this too, that's kind of on me. I never really gave them a reason to believe in me, because once I became like a risk taker when I was, younger in my 20s, I never stopped. And so I would, start businesses, or I would, start these investments, and I would get really, really excited about it. And you don't have a whole lot of people to share this stuff with, so I would share it with my parents. And it would always fail. And so anytime I would come to them with an endeavor of any sort from that point on, they wouldn't just completely shut it down, but they would try to maybe steer me away from it, if that makes sense, just because, that they've seen this song and dance before, and they're like, okay, Patrick, yeah, okay, this is going to be the next big thing, is it? Okay. Maybe you should, be a little more careful with your decision making now that you're getting a little bit older. Can you speak to that at all, Rob? I think this is probably familiar, all too familiar to most people, but that was the experience that I went through, and that quote just made such perfect sense.
I really like that quote, and as heartbreaking it is to hear that, I have to agree with it. And as a parent, I want to give this perspective as a parent because I think it's a very different perspective. And I think if you don't have kids or if you have kids that are little, so I have adult kids now, and you need to understand that, we spent every day with these kids, and these kids, they crap their pants, they wrote on the walls, they fell off of bar stools all the time. And then when they were teenagers, they were a bunch of idiots. And then when they go out into the world, you do believe in them, but you also understand that we all made mistakes in our teens and in our 20s. We understand that. We understand that you're going to go get a job, and if you don't like the job, you're going to quit it. And we all understand that that's what the 20s and early 30s are all about. So I don't want to say, they don't trust you, they don't believe in you, but what they understand is that things take time, and things may take a little bit of time for you to figure out exactly who you are and where you want to be. And so, if my son, he opened up a business right now, he's very young and he's definitely going to make some mistakes. And it's highly probable that that business may fail because of that. So it's not that I don't believe in him, because I believe in him so much. He can do anything. But I understand the process now that people have to go through to get success. And here's the thing. No one really believes into you until you have success. That's crazy if you think about it. You have to do it first and be successful at it for people to really, really buy into what you're doing.
And that's a really great segue into the next part too. But before we get there, do you think that everything you just said is because of your perspective as a business owner yourself? Because most parents are not business owners, so they can't even really wrap their head around the idea of somebody breaking off and taking that level of risk and doing it themselves. And you said something interesting too. You said you believe in your children, but you understand that the process is just absolutely brutal. I would even say that maybe I'm guessing here, most of the time they actually don't believe in their children to be able to achieve a certain goal. Do you think it's more personal with the child themselves, or do you think it's just like you said, understanding of the process? Because I don't think most people understand the process of starting a business and seeing it all the way through.
I will agree with you on that. Not everyone understands business. Not everybody has been a business owner and gone through the process. But I'm telling you, you sit down with any older person and you ask them, do you think any random kid age 20, 21 has what it takes to be successful from day one in a big business? They'll all say no. They'll all say, no, that's not how life works. There's a process. They can get started at 20. They might have some level of success in their early 20s, but it's going to take them a decade to really get to where they know enough about what they're doing to be successful. So every single older person understands that, and it's one of the things I hate about being older now. I just turned 49, and when I was a kid, I was confident, I was cocky, I knew what I wanted, I was ambitious, and these old people would tell me like, oh, you're young. Oh, that made me so mad. I'm like, you old person, you have no idea what you're talking about. And the people are like, oh, it's just a phase. It's just a phase. Screw you. Here's the worst thing about it, everybody. It's all true. It's true. And so I just think that older people understand what it is going to take to be successful, not just at trading, but if you want to get into, performing arts, you want to get into dance or singing, or you want to get into something else, It all takes time and effort, and you build your craft over a lifetime. And that's what people understand. And I did not understand that when I was 21 years old. I absolutely did not understand that. I was going to be successful now. I was going to bend the world to my will to be successful now. And I look back and say, that kid was an idiot and it was just a phase. And I hate that.
Yeah, well, I've talked about experience on my channel. We've talked about it, at length here on the podcast. And so, I mean, the real takeaway there is, even though you might not be wrong, you might be successful. It is going to take a lot of time, and it's going to take a lot of time with that constant weight of family and friends, really, because friends were the same way with me. Not really giving you the support you hoped you would get from them. So it's just something you're going to have to accept.
And I would say, yes, it is a weight, but it can also be used as a motivation. I know that was a little chip on my shoulder. I'm going to show my dad who I really am. And that actually motivated me. And maybe in hindsight, that's the reason he did it, was to try to push me. I know I've used that trick a little bit on my kids. Being like, I don't think you can do it. And then all of a sudden they're like, oh, I'm going to prove them wrong. Yeah, use it as a motivation, not as a weight.
I think that might just be the greatest takeaway of the entire episode, because that's exactly what I did. My password, back before, Google would remember your password and just inject it into everything. You had to type it in a lot. My password had a lot to do with me being successful and really showing these people up in the end. That was a great motivator. Just that whole mentality that I've always had, like, oh, you don't believe in me? I'm going to show you, and I'm not going to rub it in your face per se, but you're going to know that I got there somehow. And then that day finally came, and I kind of lost the motivation to rub it in anybody's face or even really let them know. Like most of my friends back home barely even know what I do. The satisfaction of actually getting there was worth all the crap I had to deal with from family and from friends saying, "Oh, here goes Patrick again with his harebrained ideas. Here goes another one. Let's watch him fall and laugh at him." That was more my friends, not so much my family. But just that lack of support ended up really being a huge wind in my sails when it was all said and done. You can sit there and mope about it all day, but when it's all said and done, you have to decide: am I going to sit there and constantly fight this, or am I actually going to take it and use it as a motivational weapon for me going forward? And that's exactly what I did.
And I love that, because here's what it comes down to. Look, we have no idea, and I'll just let everyone know I'm not an atheist, but I'm somewhere in the middle. I'm open to everything. But all I know is we have this life. We might have something else after. Great. We'll worry about that later. But in this life, you've got one shot. It's your life. They have theirs. They already live theirs if they're older. You've got your life. My goal in life has always been that when I'm on my deathbed, whether it's tomorrow, whether it's in a week, whether it's in 2 years, whether it's in 50 years, on my deathbed, I want to look back and say, I have no regrets, meaning I took all the chances I wanted to take. I told all the people that I loved how much I loved them as much as I possibly could. I want to leave this world with no regrets. And that has been the thing that's really pushed me through all of the naysayers, all the negativity, is that, look, when I'm on my deathbed, am I going to regret not going for this as a trader? And the answer would have been a huge resounding yes. And guess what? If I would have failed miserably, I wouldn't have looked back on it as a failure, because guess what? I've tried a lot of other things that haven't worked out. And I don't regret any of those because I took a shot. Wayne Gretzky says, you miss all the shots you don't take.
And I feel the exact same way, Rob, and I always have. I do think something you said was very interesting, though. Like, even if you didn't get there, you would still die with no regrets, which is very interesting. Just it kind of goes back to what Gary Vee was saying, too. He talks about this all the time, how he used to visit nursing homes. And every story he would ever hear is about the regret these people had because of what they didn't do. And even if it wasn't successful, even if it wasn't seen all the way to fruition, the fact that you actually gave it a try was good enough for you. And I think that's really powerful too, because I didn't think of it that way. I'm like, well, if I don't give it a try and I don't really succeed in something, then, my life at the, when it's at its end is going to be empty somehow. But you don't feel that way.
No, and I actually want to share a little thing I figured out when I was younger. Probably when I was 6, 7, 8 years old. And I remember when I was younger and the lights would go off at night, I couldn't have any part of my body, my arms, my legs, over the side of the bed because the monster under my bed was going to eat it. And as long as I stayed within the framework of the bed, I was safe. But one night I had to get up and turn the light on, and I was just so scared. I remember sitting there thinking, okay, what's the worst thing that could happen to me? And then I started thinking about, okay, I get out of bed, the monster gets me, rips me apart, and I die and I go to heaven. And I was like, well, that's not too bad. And the second I understood that, I wasn't scared anymore. I have used that trick in the early part of my life over and over again, where I say, okay, let's say I go try this trading thing, and let's say I lose all my money, and let's say I'm humiliated, and let's say that everyone's laughing at me. You know what I'd do? I'd pick myself up, I'd go get a job, I'd save up some money, and I'd go try something else. Once you come to terms with worst case scenario, and you say, oh, I can actually handle that, I can actually overcome that, all of a sudden that fear goes away to where you're no longer scared because you've accepted, if this is the worst case scenario, I'm going to do plan B. I'm going to go get a job working, as a dishwasher or whatever it is, and I'm going to plan this all out. It's just not as scary anymore. And that really helped me, and I wanted to share that story with everyone. This is the exact process that stops people from taking chances on the things that they want to do. That fear of what is going to happen. What if I fail? Plan that out to fail. And Patrick, you said that in a previous episode. Plan to fail, but also plan to succeed. Plan to fail, and guess what? Big deal. You have to go get a different job. You have to save up for a little bit more. Those are the moments where people are so scared. The unknown is so scary. If you plan out what happens when you fail, then all of a sudden you say, oh, I can handle that. And you're much more likely to go and take a chance on something without this exercise. Worst case scenario is not as bad as you think it's going to be. People have had horrible, horrible failures in this world, and they've all, I shouldn't say all, 99.9% of them have been just fine in the end.
Yeah, I guess my biggest fear was older, thinking that, because I'd waited tables for so long, I didn't really develop any other skills, or at least skills that I could put on a resume. So I was like, man, if this whole trading thing doesn't work out, the older I get, I only know how to do one thing, and I don't really like doing that one thing. And I don't want to have to start from the beginning again, because I see people who do that. They're typically very young. They're working twice the hours for half the pay. Do I really want to go back to that? So that was actually, again, some wind in my sails to make sure I saw this whole thing through, and then I didn't stop. So I guess it can go both ways, but you're right. Yeah, the worst case scenario is never the worst case scenario. I read that in the 4-Hour Workweek. There was a story of this guy who went to Ghana for a trip and got stuck there and ran out of money and couldn't come home. And he'd never been almost anywhere before, much less a place like Africa, which is often more challenging. But he ended up there for about 6 months, and he sustained himself on like this corn porridge dish 3 times a day. And when he's finally able to go back home, he actually didn't want to leave because he had made friends there and he had gotten used to the lifestyle there and he really liked it. So his worst case scenario, his nightmare scenario, actually ended up being one of his best experiences at the end of the day. And so it just goes to show. But yeah, I guess it can work both ways. And the one thing that I really kind of wanted to end with this whole thing, if you're kind of okay wrapping this up, Rob, is that once you do succeed as a trader, this doesn't all necessarily go away. Once you've kind of shown them and you really are somebody who is sustainable in this new endeavor. It doesn't mean it's necessarily going to stop, because they still don't understand it in a lot of ways. My mother still thinks that every week I'm in danger of running out of money and having to come home, which is very far from the truth nowadays. But just expect this to never stop. Maybe you have a dream of where everybody's going to finally accept what you do and say, oh, Rob, you were right this whole time. But that's not really how it works. So if you think it's all going to go away, I can promise you it's mostly not going to go away, and it might not go away at all once you finally hit that level.
And let me give everyone some advice, going back to something we talked about at the first part of this episode. Everyone has a different goal and definition. Patrick, it sounds like your mom's goal is to have you be safe and stable. And the more that you can show that trading brings you safety and stability, the more she's going to be in agreement with you and be more of a cheerleader. That's what you really need to do, is understand, what does the other person need to see? What does the other person want from me? And if you can show them how this brings it to you, like passion and happiness, that's what I want out of my kids. Is I want my kids to be passionate about something and wake up every day excited to do whatever they chose to do for work. I don't care what they do, but that's what I want for them. Understand that everyone has different ideas, different things. And if you understand what that person wants, hey, this person wants stability. Well, you just have to show them how it gives you stability. Because if you show them that this job does not give you stability, they were right and they were correct. And it's never going to go away. But if you can show them stability, then all of a sudden they say, oh, okay, I see that they have what I want them to have, and I'm happy for them. You just got to understand who they are, what they're looking for, and show them how your life is conducive to their dreams for you.
You do. And sometimes, depending on who you're dealing with, it still may not be enough for you to get the results you're satisfied with. What ended up kind of clinching it for me was I was aware of the credit card debt that they had piled up over time. They're both retired. They have money coming in, but they're still a bit impulsive in the way they spend. And I went in and paid off their credit cards all the way to zero. And that kind of drove the point home. That was the point I was trying to drive home. So sometimes maybe you just got to go out there and prove, not with flashy things, but prove, say, hey, this lifestyle that I've worked so hard to create, it's actually real. So it might just come down to doing that as well. Did you have anything to close with on top of that, Rob?
I'll just close with this. If you make yourself happy, you're going to make the people that really care about you happy as well. Now, there's always going to be people that are jealous, and I'm sorry, you just can't win them over. But the people that genuinely love you, if they can see that you're happy, I promise you, they're going to be okay with it. They might be a little nitpicky here or there, or say little things here or there, but I promise you, they will be happy for you.
And on that note, traders, thank you for joining us for episode 28 of the Trading Psychology Podcast. For Rob Reinhold and for VP, we will see you next week.
Goodbye, everybody.